What would you do if your husband introduced you to his wealthy family as the Maid in front of 200 guests on his sister's wedding day? Most women would make a scene. They'd throw a glass, cry in the bathroom, or leave. I didn't throw a glass. I smiled, raised my champagne, and waited 40 minutes. Because while my husband thought he was putting me in my place, he completely forgot one detail. I paid for our house in cash, and 3 weeks earlier, I had quietly moved every single dollar out of his reach. My name is Isabella, and this is how a single sentence at a cake table cost my ex-husband everything he owned. I am not the woman who explodes. People, when they hear this story, want me to be. They want the glass, the bathroom, the cousin with the tissue. That is the version his family tells now. It is not what happened. I am a vice president at a mid-sized consulting firm in Boston. I clear 6 figures. I bought our house with cash before the wedding. The deed has always been in my name. I signed a prenuptial agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in October in a conference room with a water filter. He laughed at the time. He signed it anyway because the alternative was no wedding. 6 months in, his sister Daniela got engaged. 6 months is enough to learn which uncle hates which cousin, and that Marco's mother, Helena, will never eat at a restaurant she did not personally approve. It is also enough to learn that Marco, when he is tired, when he has had a glass too many, in front of people he has known since he was small, will say the first thing that comes into his head. I had a sense of where the load-bearing wall was. The reception was in a restored barn outside the city, 200 guests, almost all of them his. I knew maybe 12. The cake was 3 tiers, almond buttercream. I was at the cake table because the venue coordinator had disappeared and the queue was growing and someone had to do it, and I was the one standing closest. That is the kind of thing I do. I am the person standing closest. I have been that person at every job I have ever had. It is not a flaw. It is a fact. Marco came up to me. He was holding a glass of red. He was smiling the way he smiles when he is about to introduce me to someone and wants the introduction to be funny. I have learned what that smile means. It means he is about to reduce me to a single sentence in front of strangers. Enjoy it and not check with me first. He took my elbow. He said, "Come on, my cousins want to meet you." I put the cake knife down. I wiped my hands on the napkin. I let him lead me across the room to a long table near the back where 4 of his cousins were sitting with his uncle Renzo and his wife Carla. Marco set his glass down. He put his hand on the small of my back. He said in a voice pitched to Carrie, "This is Isabella. She takes care of the house." I felt the words land, not like a slap, like a label being printed and taped to my forehead in a font I could not peel off. His cousin Vincenzo laughed. The kind of laugh a man makes when he is being polite to a woman he has decided is not in the room. His uncle Renzo leaned back and said, "And Marco too, probably." More laughter. Carla smiled at me in a way that was meant to be kind and was instead an assessment. I smiled back. I shook hands. Marco squeezed my waist the way a man squeezes a waist when he is pleased with himself. Across the room at the head table, Daniela caught my eye. She was holding a glass of champagne. She did not smile. She looked at Marco, then at me, then down at her plate. She was the only one at the wedding who had clocked what had just happened. In 8 months, I have learned that Daniela does not waste emotion. If she set the glass down, she meant to. I let Marco lead me away from the table. I let him pour me a glass. I let him tell a story about a client of mine at my own firm that I had told him in confidence the week before. I let him get to the punchline, which was about me being too organized, and the table laughed and I laughed too, because the alternative is to make a scene at a wedding. I waited 40 minutes. I let the band start again. I let the father-daughter dance. I let the cake cutting. Then I asked Marco to come with me. I said, "I need to talk to you for a second, over by the cake." He followed me, smiling. He thought I was going to be flirty. He was wrong. I faced him. I did not touch him. I said, "You do not get to introduce me like that. Ever." He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes out of a man who has never been told no by his family. He said, "It is a joke, Bella. Relax. You're so sensitive." I let the sentence finish. Then I said, "The only card you have forgotten I own is the deed to this house and the prenup. Let us see how funny you are at the mediation table." His face did what faces do when the math suddenly changes. I watched it change. Then I turned around. I picked up my glass. I finished the wedding. That is the moment. That is the cake table. Everything I am about to tell you is the 3 weeks that made that sentence possible. To understand the sentence I said at the cake table, you have to go back 3 weeks before the wedding, to a Tuesday morning in early September. to a law office on the 32nd floor of a building in the financial district. The carpet is gray, the air smells like paper. My grandmother died 2 years ago. She left me 2 things, her wedding ring, which I keep in a velvet box on my dresser, and a trust set up by her estate lawyer, a woman named Margaret Hua, who has the kind of face that looks like it has never been surprised by anything a client has said. When my grandmother got sick, Margaret flew in every other month to talk about inheritance structures in a voice calibrated not to frighten an old woman in her last year of life. The trust was designed to do one thing: keep money that came from my family insulated from whatever I might do next in my personal life. It was a recognition made by a woman married 53 years who watched 2 friends lose everything in divorces they did not see coming, that sometimes the most loving thing a grandmother can do is build her granddaughter a door that locks from the inside. I had not touched the trust in 2 years. The principal sat there. It earned interest. I made my own money. What changed in early September was a phone call from Marco's mother. Helena calls on Sundays around 4, and she talks for 45 minutes. I was in the kitchen. Marco was on the couch, half asleep. I picked up the phone. Helena was talking about the wedding. 4 weeks away. The flowers had not been finalized. The cake had not been finalized. Marco, she said, was useless at this kind of thing. Marco, she said, was a good boy, but he had never organized anything more complicated than a dinner reservation. She laughed. It was the laugh of a woman who has spent her whole life teaching her son that organization is someone else's job, and that someone else is, by default, the woman he ends up with. I said, I can help. She said, I knew you would. I said it the way I always say it, because I am a person who helps, and that is the central organizing fact of my existence. I did not wake up that Tuesday wanting to leave my husband. I woke up wanting to confirm that the door my grandmother had built for me still worked. A door that has not been tested is just a painting of a door. I did not do this because I did not trust Marco. I did this because I wanted the option. The option is the difference between a woman who can leave and a woman who can only threaten to leave. Margaret Hua's office, 32nd floor. I arrived at 9. Margaret was at her desk with a folder open. My name in black ink. She had been waiting for me to walk in for 2 years. I said, Margaret, I want to move some money into the trust. She did not ask why. She said, How much? I said, $480,000. The number came out in a way that surprised me, because I had not decided on a number. I had thought I would move 100,000. 480 came from somewhere below my conscious mind. It was most of our joint savings. It was the number that would make the math uncomfortable for Marco if he ever had to do the math. It was the size of the door I wanted. Margaret wrote it down. She said, 3 business days, signatures here and here, notarized identification. The trust documents are on file. I signed the papers. I left the office at 9:41. I stepped out onto the street. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment just to feel the air because what I had just done felt, in my body, like a small weather event, like the moment before a storm when the wind goes quiet and you can hear your own breathing for the first time. I did not tell Marco. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Daniela. I went back to the office. I worked until 7. I drove home. Marco was on the couch. He asked me if I had had a good day. I said yes. We watched something on television. He fell asleep around 10. I sat on the other end of the couch with a glass of water and looked at the ceiling. That is the card. That is the 480,000. 3 weeks later, when Marco called me the maid at his sister's wedding, the house was not his. The money was not his. The door I had built on a Tuesday morning was the only reason I could finish the sentence. Let me take you to the morning of the wedding, 3 weeks after the trust move. A Saturday in late September circled on every calendar in the family for 9 months. I woke up at 5 because Marco's phone was not on the charger. That is the way you know something is wrong in a house. Not by an alarm, but by the absence of a sound you have come to rely on. He was asleep on his side, mouth open. I got out of bed. I had 4 missed calls from Daniela. 2 from Marco's mother. A text from the florist sent at 11:45 the night before that read, We have not received the deposit confirmation. The wedding is in 14 hours. Please call us. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark with my coffee and I called the florist. I want to be clear about what had happened. Marco had been asked in July to confirm the florist. He had been asked in August to confirm the florist. He had been asked 2 weeks before the wedding to confirm the florist. The deposit was $420. Marco had not confirmed the florist. I think Marco exists in a permanent state of having not confirmed the florist, and the women in his life have, in various ways, absorbed the cost of that permanent state for his entire adult life. The florist picked up on the second ring. I apologized. I said I would call the bank. The florist said in a careful voice that the wedding was in 14 hours and they needed confirmation by 6. I said, "You will have it." I called our joint bank. Banks, it turns out, do not sleep, because money does not sleep. I confirmed the deposit. I sent the receipt from my phone, in bed, in the dark, while Marco slept. I did not pay the deposit out of any structural commitment to marital sharing. I paid it because that was the account on file. The money in the joint account, as of 3 weeks earlier, was mine. The $480,000 I had moved into the trust had been most of the balance. There was a residual of around $12,000, and of that $12,000, $420 was about to leave for a florist. The rest of the $480,000 was sitting in an inheritance-protected trust in my grandmother's name, and Marco did not know it was there. I did not wake him up to tell him. I thought, the florist is paid, the day is on, and Marco will sleep for another 2 hours and wake up and be Marco. By 6:30, I was in the car. The venue was 45 minutes away. I had not eaten. I had 17 new messages, all from women in the wedding party, variations on, "Is Marco up yet?" and "Did anyone hear from the florist?" By 8, I was in the bridal suite, fixing the broken heel on the flower girl's shoe. The heel had snapped during the rehearsal. The flower girl was 4. Her name was Sophia. She was crying not because the heel was broken, but because there were too many women in the room. I sat on the floor. I found a needle in Daniela's emergency kit. I sewed the heel back on. I told Sophia that the heel had a secret and that the secret was that it could fall off and get put back on. She stopped crying. She gave me a hug. The most useful 3 seconds of my morning. By 11, the photographer was asking where Marco was. I called him. He was awake. He was looking for his cufflinks. I told him where they were. I told him to put on the shirt I had pressed. I told him to be at the venue by 12:30. He said, "I am on it." He said it the way he always says he is on it, with a confidence that is not connected to any evidence. By 1, the ceremony was about to start. Marco arrived at 1, 15 minutes late. He had not combed his hair. His tie was crooked. I did not say a word. I straightened it. I patted it twice. He said, "Thanks, Bella." He kissed me on the top of the head. He walked down the aisle. By 6:30 in the evening, I was the most functional person at the wedding. The bridal party was tipsy. The venue coordinator had gone home. The bar had run out of 2 wines. The band had lost a cable. I had talked to the venue manager. I had called the cake vendor. I had packed an emergency kit for Daniela with safety pins, with Band-Aids, with a snack bar. I had done all of this between the ceremony and the cocktail hour, on top of the florist at 5 in the morning and the broken heel and Marco's tie. I had not eaten. I had not sat down. I had not been asked by anyone, including Marco, if I was okay. By 8:30, Marco was at the bar with his cousins. He had changed his jacket. He had a glass of red. He was telling a story about a client of mine at my own firm that I had told him in confidence, and the punchline was about me being too organized. And his cousin Vincenzo laughed, and his uncle Renzo laughed, and the table laughed, and I stood there and I laughed too. And Marco put his hand on the small of my back and walked me over to the cousins' table. The rest is the cake table. The rest is the maid. Let me take you back to the moment, not the cake table warning. The moment before. When I was still smiling, the band had come back from their break. They were playing a Sinatra cover. The dance floor was half full. Marco was on his second glass of red, which was 1 glass more than I would have liked, because Marco, at 1 glass of red, is the Marco I married, and Marco at 2 glasses of red is the Marco his family knows. And those are not always the same man. I was at the cake table because the venue coordinator had gone home. Her name was Teresa. She had taken 1 look at Marco at the rehearsal and said to me, "Is he going to be okay tonight?" I had said yes, because that is what I say. Teresa left at 9. The cake was scheduled to be cut at 9:30. I cut it myself. I took the long knife out of the drawer. I cut the bottom tier, then the second, then the top. I laid the slices out on platters that no one was watching. I did this for 40 minutes while people danced. Marco came up to me. He was smiling the way he smiles when he is about to introduce me to someone and wants the introduction to be funny. I have learned what that smile means. It means he is about to reduce me to a single sentence in front of strangers, enjoy it, and not check with me first. He took my elbow. He said, "Come on, my cousins want to meet you." I put the cake knife down. I let him lead me across the room to a long table near the back where 4 of his cousins were sitting with his uncle Renzo and his wife, Carla. Marco set his glass down. He put his hand on the small of my back. He said in a voice pitched to Carrie, "This is Isabella, she takes care of the house." I felt the words land, like a label being printed and taped to my forehead in a font I could not peel off. His cousin Vincenzo laughed, the kind of laugh a man makes when he is being polite to a woman he has decided is not in the room. His uncle Renzo leaned back and said, "And Marco, too, probably." More laughter. Carla smiled at me in a way that was meant to be kind and was, instead, an assessment. Marco squeezed my waist the way a man squeezes a waist when he is pleased with himself. I want to tell you what I was feeling. I have been asked this by friends, by Daniela, by my own reflection on the nights I cannot sleep. The answer is not what you would think. I was not angry yet. I was embarrassed in the precise way a person is embarrassed when someone they love does something in public they have been warning them about in private for 6 months. I was at hour 14 of a day that had begun at 5 in the morning with a florist who had not been paid. I was the most functional person at the wedding, and I had just been introduced to the family I had spent the entire day serving as the woman who takes care of the house. The house in question was mine. The mortgage in question was mine. The deed in question was in my desk drawer at home, in a folder I had not opened in 6 months, in a name that was not his. Across the room at the head table, Daniela caught my eye. She did not smile. She looked at Marco, then at me, then down at her plate. She was the only one at the wedding who had clocked what had just happened. I could see it in the way she set her glass down without drinking from it. Daniela does not waste emotion. Cousin Vincenzo turned back to me with the small questions they have been told to ask. "Where are you from? What do you do? How did you two meet?" I answered each one. I was polite. I said consulting. I did not say the firm. His wife asked if I had children. I said no. His wife said, "Soon, maybe?" I said, "Maybe." Marco stood next to me, his hand still on my waist, listening with the half-attention of a man already thinking about his next glass of wine. The smile I kept on my face for the next 40 minutes was the most expensive thing I have ever produced. It was not a real smile. It was a structural smile. It was the smile of a woman who has decided in real time that she is going to dismantle a man in cash and contract law, and who understands that the dismantling will not work if the man knows it is coming. I waited 40 minutes. I let the band start again. I let the father-daughter dance. I let the cake cutting. I let a man I had never met ask me to dance. I danced with him. I was a good dancer, the way I am good at most things, which is to say I was paying attention. Then I asked Marco to come with me. I said calmly in a voice that I had practiced in my head for 40 minutes. "I need to talk to you for a second, over by the cake." He followed me, smiling. He thought I was going to be flirty. He thought I was going to pull him into a quiet corner and tell him I was having a good time, or that I liked the toasts, or that I was sorry I had been sharp with him about the florist. He thought I was going to be the version of me he knows how to manage, which is the version of me that complains, mildly, and then forgives, and then moves on. He was wrong. I stood at the cake table. I faced him. I did not touch him. I had a piece of cake on a plate in my right hand because I had been cutting the cake, and I had not put the plate down, and I did not put the plate down now. It was a small white plate with a slice of almond buttercream on it and a plastic fork, and a napkin. I wanted on the record that my hands were not shaking. I said, "You do not get to introduce me like that. Ever." Marco looked at me. His face did the small recomputation that a man's face does when he realizes the woman in front of him is not performing the role he has written for her. He tilted his head. He said, "Bella, what is wrong with you?" I said, "I just told you what is wrong. Do not introduce me as the woman who takes care of the house. I do not take care of the house. I bought the house. I paid for the house in cash. The deed is in my name. I am not the maid. I am the person whose name is on the deed. Do you understand the difference?" Marco's face did a second recomputation. He had not been expecting the deed. He had been expecting the small complaints, the kind of conversation he could ride out with a glass of wine and a joke. The deed was different. The deed was concrete. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes out of a man who has never been told no by his family, not once, not in 32 years. He said, "It is a joke, Bella. Relax. You're so sensitive." I want to be clear about what I was feeling when he said the word sensitive. I have been thinking about this for 6 weeks. What I was feeling was not anger. Anger would have meant that I had lost my composure. What I was feeling was a kind of cold arithmetic. I was doing the math. The math was simple. Marco had not paid the florist. Marco had not been on time for the ceremony. Marco had introduced me to his family as the maid. Marco had laughed when I told him not to. Marco had called me sensitive. The math was, if Marco was going to introduce me as the maid, then Marco was going to find out, in cash and contract law, what the maid was actually worth. I let his sentence finish. I let it sit in the air for 2 full seconds. Then I said, in a voice that I want to be very clear was level and quiet and did not waver and was not raised and was not the voice of a woman who was losing her mind, but the voice of a woman who had been losing her mind quietly for 6 months and had decided at a cake table on a Saturday in September to stop. The only card you have forgotten I own is the deed to this house and the prenup. Let us see how funny you are at the mediation table. Marco's face did what faces do when the math suddenly changes. I watched it change. It was the face of a man who had assumed for his entire life that the women in his life would not check the math. It was the face of a man who had assumed the math was someone else's problem. I did not enjoy watching his face change. The right word is recognition. The right word is, I told you so. I set the plate down. I set the fork down. I folded the napkin. I turned around. I walked back to the head table. I picked up my glass of water. I finished the wedding. Marco did not come after me. Marco did not apologize. He stood at the cake table for about 3 minutes, and then he went back to the bar, and he got another glass of red, and he did not mention what had happened to anyone at the wedding. The wedding ended at 11. The bride and groom left in a vintage car. I helped Teresa, the venue coordinator, clean up because I was the person who helped. At midnight, I drove home. Marco was already in bed. The light was off. He was asleep or pretending to be asleep. I stood in the kitchen for a long time in the dark with my coat on, holding my keys. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not unpack. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I started making the calls. The wedding was on a Saturday. Sunday morning came. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark next to a man for the last time. At 5:30, I got out of bed. I made the coffee. I called Margaret Hua on her personal cell. Margaret picked up on the first ring because Margaret has been waiting for me to call her for 2 years. I said, Margaret, I am going to need a divorce lawyer. She said, I have one. Patrice Owens. I will text you the number in 10 minutes. Tell her I sent you. I said, thank you, Margaret. She said, you should have called me 6 months ago. I said, I know. At 7, I called Patrice. She answered the phone the way a surgeon answers a page. I told her the situation in 7 minutes. The deed, the prenup, the trust, the wedding, what Marco had said. I did not tell her how I felt. I told her the math. Patrice said, come to my office at 10. Bring the deed, the prenup, the trust documents, any texts from the last 6 months. We are going to build a case today. I went back to the bedroom. Marco was still asleep. I packed 2 suitcases, the work laptop, the charger, a week's worth of clothes, and the velvet box with my grandmother's ring. I did not pack the framed wedding photo. I did not pack the photo of us in Positano. I showered. I dressed. I put on a navy dress I had bought for a client meeting. I left the wedding ring on the dresser. At 10:30, Marco came into the kitchen. He looked at me. He looked at the suitcases. He said, what is going on? I did not raise my voice. I said, we need to talk. He said, Bella, what is this? You're being dramatic. It was a joke. We are going to brunch with my mother in an hour. She is expecting us. I said, we are not going to brunch with your mother. I am going to see a lawyer. Her name is Patrice Owens. I have an appointment at 11. The suitcases are mine. The wedding ring is on the dresser. I will be back with Patrice at 3 to talk about next steps. You can call your mother. You can call your lawyer. I have made the calls I need to make. Marco's face did the 3rd recomputation of the weekend. The first had been at the cake table. The second had been when I said the word prenup. The third was at 10:30 on a Sunday morning in the kitchen with the coffee still hot, and it was the recomputation of a man who had assumed for his entire life that the women in his life would not leave the kitchen. He said, you are not leaving this house. I said, I am leaving this house. The house is in my name. I am the only person in this marriage who can legally tell you to leave this house. And I am choosing today to leave it first because I want you to know what it feels like to be told to leave. The doorbell rang at 10:45. It was Helena. Marco had called her. She came into the kitchen. She looked at me. She looked at Marco. She looked at the suitcases. she said in the voice of a woman who has been managing her son's life for 32 years. Isabella, please, think about the family. Think about Daniela. Think about what this will do to her honeymoon. I said, I thought about the family. Marco did not. Marco called me his maid. In front of his family, on his sister's wedding day. I dressed the bridesmaids. I paid the florist at 5 a.m. because Marco forgot. I cut the cake because Marco did not. The math is the math, Helena. The deed is in my name. The prenup is signed. The trust is in place. The family you are asking me to think about is the family that laughed at me at the wedding. Helena started to cry. Marco started to yell. I picked up the suitcases. I opened the front door. I set them on the porch. I picked up my coffee. I drank the last of it. I set the mug in the sink. I said to both of them, I will be back at 3. With Patrice. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not follow me. I will see you at 3. I walked out of my own house in a navy dress with 2 suitcases, and I did not look back. I drove to Patrice's office, and the radio was playing something I do not remember, and the sun was out and the leaves had not yet started to turn. Here's what happened in the 48 hours after I walked out of my own house. By Sunday evening, the family had mobilized. Marco's family is a federation, with Helena as the informal head of state, with Marco's sister Daniela as the only member who has ever publicly disagreed, and with Marco's cousins as a kind of infantry that can be deployed for weddings, christenings, brunches, and, in this case, the very specific operation of convincing a woman who is leaving her husband that she is, in fact, overreacting. The operation had a clear chain of command. It had a clear message. The message was, come home, he is sorry, it was a joke. Do not throw away a marriage over a joke. Do not let pride destroy a family. The message was sent in identical language by every member of the Federation except Daniela. The operation began at 4 p.m. I was at Patrice's office going through the text message archive. My phone lit up. It was Helena. The text said, Isabella, please. Marco is devastated. He did not mean it. He is sorry. Come home. We can talk to Father Russo. We can talk to a counselor. Your mother would want you to think this through. I showed it to Patrice. She said, save it. Do not reply. We are building a record. I saved it. I did not reply. At 5, Marco's cousin Vincenzo texted. Vincenzo, who had laughed at the maid joke. His text said, Hey Bella, Marco's broken up. He says he was kidding. You know how he is. Don't throw away a good marriage over a joke. Come to brunch tomorrow. My wife is making carbonara. I showed it to Patrice. She said, save it. I saved it. At 6, Marco's uncle Renzo called my office. I did not pick up. He left a 4-minute voicemail. He said, Isabella, Renzo, I have known Marco his whole life. He made a mistake. The family is behind him. Don't let pride destroy a family. We are Italians. We work things out. Call me back. I showed the transcript to Patrice. She said, save it. I saved it. At 7, my phone lit up one more time. The name on the screen was not Helena. It was not Vincenzo. It was not Renzo. It was Daniela. The text said, I am on my honeymoon. I should not be writing this. I am writing it anyway. I am so sorry. He does this. He has always done this. He called his ex-girlfriend, the cleaning lady at Easter, and the family laughed. The family always laughs. I have never laughed. I have been waiting for someone in his life to stop laughing. I think it might be you. I love my brother. I also know what my brother is. I am on your side. I am on the side of the math. If you need anything, I am here. If you do not need anything, I am still here. Do not call my mother. She is going to call you. She is on his side. T. I read that text 4 times. I read it in the hotel room I had booked for the week, the small one with the desk and the white curtains. I read it before I went to bed. I read it when I woke up at 3 a.m, which I did every night for the first 2 weeks. I did not reply because I was not yet at a place where I could reply to Daniela without crying, and I was not yet ready to cry in front of a text message. I moved out within 48 hours. I took a sublet in a neighborhood I had never lived in, with brick buildings and a coffee shop on the corner and a bookstore that closes at 10. I signed a 6-month lease. I bought a new bed, a new set of sheets, a new coffee maker. Patrice filed the divorce on Tuesday morning. The filing cited the public humiliation at the wedding, the introduction as the maid, the cousin's laughter, the comment about being sensitive, and the historical pattern of Marco using humor to reduce the women in his life to objects in his family's living room. The filing also cited the deed, the prenup, and the trust, The filing was very clear about the math. Marco was served on Wednesday at his office by a process server who, I am told, was a woman in her 50s with a kind face and a manila envelope. On Thursday, I received an email from a lawyer I had never heard of whose name was Gregory Haskins. His email said, "Dear Ms. Castillo, my client, Mr. Marco Bianchi, has retained me in connection with your recent filing. We believe this matter can be resolved quickly and amicably. Please contact my office to schedule a mediation." I forwarded the email to Patrice. Patrice forwarded it to me with one word in the subject line. The word was good. The mediation was scheduled for the following Wednesday. It was held in a conference room on the 9th floor of a building in the financial district, the kind of building where the conference rooms have leather chairs and the air smells like furniture polish. Marco arrived with Gregory Haskins. I arrived with Patrice. Marco did not look at me when he came in. I did not look at him. We sat on opposite sides of the table. Gregory Haskins opened a folder. Patrice opened a folder. The mediator, a woman named Judith Stern, who had been doing this for 31 years, asked each side to make an opening offer. The mediator asked Gregory Haskins for Marco's opening offer. He cleared his throat. He said, in the voice of a man who has been told by his client that the marriage was a small misunderstanding, "My client is prepared to offer the sum of $80,000 as a one-time settlement, in exchange for a mutual non-disclosure agreement, the return of personal items, and a clean break. The deed remains, of course, in Ms. Castillo's name. The prenuptial agreement remains in force. I want to be clear about the number. $80,000. To a woman who had, 3 weeks before the wedding, $480,000 in joint savings, a 6-figure salary, and a deed to a house paid in cash. $80,000 with a non-disclosure agreement so the family could continue to tell the version where Isabella overreacted, and Marco was a good boy who made a small joke. Patrice did not at first react. The opening offer is the offer the other side is willing to be embarrassed by. The opening offer is the offer that lets the other side say, later, that they came to the table in good faith. Patrice knows this. I know this. Gregory Haskins knows this. Judith Stern looked at Patrice. "Ms. Owens, do you have a response?" Patrice set her pen down. She said, in the voice of a woman who charges $900 an hour and does not waste a sentence, "Ms. Castillo's counteroffer is $310,000, plus a written reconfirmation of the deed, recorded with the Registry of Deeds, plus a permanent restraining order preventing Mr. Bianchi from making public statements that refer to Ms. Castillo in the context of domestic service, or any role that does not reflect her actual professional and financial position, plus an apology in writing, on letterhead, signed by Mr. Bianchi, plus reimbursement of Ms. Castillo's legal fees. The mediation can conclude this afternoon if Mr. Bianchi is prepared to accept those terms." The room went quiet. Marco, who had been looking at his hands, looked up. He looked at Patrice. He looked at me. He looked at Gregory Haskins. He said, in a voice that was not as confident as the voice he had used at the cake table, "That is not a serious offer." Patrice said, "It is a serious offer. The non-disclosure agreement your client proposed has been replaced with a non-disparagement clause that runs in Ms. Castillo's favor, not yours. The structure of the offer is not negotiable. The numbers are not negotiable very far." Gregory Haskins said, "My client will need to consult with his family." Patrice said, "Your client has until 5 o'clock today. After 5, the offer is withdrawn, and Ms. Castillo will proceed to trial. Trial will take 14 to 20 months. The trial will include the public record of the wedding. The trial will include the testimony of every member of Mr. Bianchi's family who laughed at the wedding. The trial will include the process server, the manila envelope, the recording of Mr. Bianchi's opening offer of $80,000, and the text messages from his mother, his cousin, and his uncle. The trial will include the testimony of Mr. Bianchi's sister, who has indicated through counsel that she is prepared to testify. I will let Mr. Bianchi decide which is more expensive, $80,000 or 14 to 20 months of public record." Marco looked at Gregory Haskins. Gregory Haskins looked at Marco. Marco nodded, the way a man nods when the math has finally become the math, and not the version of the math he had been telling himself for 2 years. Gregory Haskins said, "My client accepts the structure. We would like to discuss the numbers within the structure." Patrice said, "The numbers are not negotiable very far." Gregory Haskins said, "We accept the numbers. We have one small request. The apology letter, addressed to Ms. Castillo personally, delivered in a sealed envelope, not in open court." Patrice said, That is acceptable. The mediation is concluded at 12:47 in the afternoon. The signed agreement will be filed with the court by close of business today. Judith Stern said, "Is there anything else?" Marco said, "I want to say something to my wife." I said, "I am not your wife. We are in the process of a divorce. You can say it to Patrice." Marco looked at me. He did not say it to Patrice. He did not say it to me. He looked at the table. Judith Stern said, "Then the mediation is concluded." We stood up. We did not shake hands. We left the conference room. We took different elevators. I rode down alone with Patrice and the doors closed, and Patrice said, "Good." I said, "Good." The elevator opened onto the lobby. The lobby smelled like marble and coffee. I walked outside. The sun was out. The leaves had started to turn. It is now 3 months after the wedding. I am in my own living room. The deed is in my name. The reconfirmation was filed with the Registry of Deeds on the same day as the mediation agreement. The registry sent me a copy in a manila envelope with a small red stamp that said, "Recorded." I keep the reconfirmation in the same folder as the original deed. The folder is in the desk drawer in the corner, the desk where I sit on Sundays with a coffee. The furniture is mostly the same. The couch is the same. Marco's chair, the big leather one by the window, is gone. I had it removed the week after the mediation by a man named Eddie who, when he came to pick it up, said, "Ma'am, this is a good chair." I said, "I am sure. Take the chair." He did not ask any more questions. The living room, without Marco's chair, is bigger than I remember. The room was, for 6 months, holding its breath. The room can breathe now. Marco came back for the last of his things on a Saturday in November. He came with his mother. I had packed his things into 4 cardboard boxes, labeled in black marker, on the kitchen table. I had packed the boxes the night before, with the same care I had used to pack the suitcases the morning I left. And with the same small grief, which was not for Marco, and was for the version of me that had, 6 months earlier, stood in the kitchen and said, "I do." Helena did not look at me. Marco did not look at me. Helena said in a voice that was, for the first time in the time I had known her, smaller than usual, "Goodbye, Isabella." I said, "Goodbye, Helena." Marco did not say goodbye. He carried the boxes to the car. I did not stay at the window. I got a text about an hour later from Daniela. The text had a photo of a page from the wedding album. The page had 8 photos. Marco was laughing in 3. I was laughing in 2. I was not laughing in 3. In those 3, I was looking at Marco, and Marco was looking somewhere else, and the look on my face was the look of a woman who was doing the math. Daniela had blacked out Marco's face in every photo with a black Sharpie, in the back of a taxi on the way from the airport. The text below the photo said, "I am sending you the original album in the mail. I think you should have the version where you are the only person in the family photos. I am so sorry. I love you. I am proud of you. Die." I sat on the couch and looked at the photo for a long time. I did not cry. I cried once, on a Tuesday in October, on the train home from work, because a tree outside the window was, for a moment, exactly the color of a thing my grandmother had said about autumn when I was small. A woman across the aisle offered me a tissue. I took it. She did not ask why. I am grateful for that woman to this day. I am still in the house. I am still at the firm. I am still a vice president. I still have the trust in my grandmother's name. I still have the photo of the wedding album with Marco's face blacked out in a frame on my dresser, next to the velvet box with my grandmother's ring in a place where I can see it every morning. I do not know what Marco is doing. I do not know if he is at his mother's couch or in a new apartment or at a bar with his cousins, telling a new version of the story where Isabella overreacted. I do know what the math is. The deed is the deed. The trust is the trust. The mediation agreement is filed. The apology letter is in the folder, on letterhead, with Marco's signature in blue ink. I have not opened the letter. I will open it when I am ready. I will be ready. Thank you for staying with me. I do not know who you are. I do not know if you have ever been called a maid or a cleaning lady or a woman who takes care of the house by a person who did not pay for the house. I do not know if you have ever been told you are overreacting by a man whose math does not add up. But if any of this sounds like you, I want you to know that the door exists. The door was built for you by a woman in your family who loved you enough to imagine the worst, and to build the option, and to leave the option in a folder, in a name that is yours. Build the option. Do not be afraid to use it. If this story stayed with you, leave me a comment with the word deed in it. And if you like stories where the woman does not throw the glass, but does something far more expensive, hit the button. We will see you in the next one.